Welcome to Work Like a Human, a podcast from Go Innovation. Welcome back to Work Like a Human. I'm very excited for you to hear this conversation between myself and Ethan Evans, who's vice president at Twitch Prime. So Twitch, you may have heard of them, it's a massive game streaming platform that was acquired by Amazon in 2014, where Ethan had already been working for more than a decade. So when I say it's massive, in 2019, there were on average 3.64 million monthly broadcasters. And as of March 2020, there were 1.44 million concurrent viewers on average. Esports and video game streaming are a massive multi-billion-dollar global industry. And part of why I wanted to talk to Ethan was to understand this rapidly growing phenomenon. What I discovered was that our conversation would be about so much more, which shouldn't have surprised me because I got to meet Ethan at a leadership development event that we hosted in Colorado, and you'll hear him talk a little bit more about that. I love getting to know him in person. So we do talk about esports, gaming, streaming, but we also talk about dystopian futures, virtual reality, generations in the workplace, and how to get promoted in your career. Like, we covered a ton of ground, so buckle your seatbelt. But if I had to identify the core of our conversation, it would be this. At the end of the day, people are the most valuable investment that you can make. You see, we spend such a large percentage of our lives focused on work in some form or fashion. For Ethan, what matters is helping people have more successful and fulfilling careers, because that investment has, in his words, potentially massive downstream effects. While Ethan isn't a gamer, he does have a streaming channel on Twitch, and you can find his videos on YouTube, called Easy Coach, where he gives career advice on everything from making better resumes to how to get promoted. So our conversation really ends up being about values. Values are the filters through which we pass our most important decisions. So as we prepare to step into this conversation, take a moment and think about your own values, whether you're watching or listening. What matters most to you? What would others say matters most to you if they could see how you spend your time, what you do, or what you say over a consistent period of time? What motivates you? What influences your yes and your no? In other words, your boundaries. In my experience coaching leaders, this tends to be a really neglected area of reflection. But if you're not clear on who you are and what you really value, and this is true for individuals, teams, organizations, even whole societies, if you're not clear on these things, your decisions may not be as focused or as consistent as they could be. So you might be unknowingly holding back yourself, your team, your organization, your family, your community. So with all of that in mind, let's turn now to my conversation with Ethan.
Man, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. It's been a long time since we had a chance to see each other face to face, and I'm excited to catch up.
So we were together for an event called the Leadership Clinic, which Go Innovation does. We pull leaders together for 3 days of very hands-on learning. Really cool community of people, but I'm so grateful that we intersected because of that. I've gotten to learn a lot about your work with Amazon and with Twitch, and also through the Easy Coach, which you have been, I'm going to ask you more about. So, man, I'm just glad to have you on here. So give us the thumbnail sketch. People are obviously familiar with Amazon. Most people are also at this point probably familiar with Twitch, but talk about your role and a little bit of how you got to where you are.
Sure. So I grew up in the Midwest. Computers arrived when I was a kid, and I was taken with them. I actually wrote a letter to Apple Computer when I was in high school and said, what do I need to do so I can come work for you? They told me I needed a degree in computer science or computer engineering, and they listed 5 schools. 3 of them were in California, and that left Carnegie Mellon and MIT. And I ended up going to Carnegie Mellon. I never actually have worked at Apple. I went kind of everywhere else. So I went to lots of startups in technology and pivoted into leadership. Mm-hmm. And so along the way, about 12 years into my career, just keeping it brief, sure, Amazon called and said, would you like to come to Seattle? What people forget now is that was almost 15 years ago. Amazon wasn't known as a technology company. They were an e-commerce, they were an emerging e-commerce company, but Kindles hadn't been built. There was no Alexa, there was no AWS. There was no Prime. Prime had just come out. And so I joined and I wondered, oh my gosh, have I joined the IT department of a bookstore? Is this going to be the right thing? But they actually wanted me to build Prime Video, what became Prime Video. And so I built our first movie and TV download service, which became a streaming service. From there, I went to video games. I built the app store that powers Kindles and now Alexa. So if you get an app on a Kindle or a skill on an Alexa, that's technology I built. And then we bought Twitch, the TV and the video game streaming service.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I know video because I built Prime Video, and I know games because I ran our first game studio. I want to go work at Twitch, and like it's the intersection. Along the way, I started the gaming pillar of Amazon Prime, which we call Twitch Prime. And so that's what I do full time now, is bring gaming content and gaming enjoyment to Amazon Prime members. And that's my main focus. And then personally, after so long in leadership, I found I couldn't mentor as many people as were interested. And so I started something I call the Easy Coach. My middle initial is Z. So Ethan Zane became Easy Coach. And I also wanted to be easy for people. So I go on Twitch, which is a natural medium. And I coach people about their careers, answer whatever questions they have. We usually have one topic a week. I talk about whatever is on people's minds. It's very interactive. And with video and with chat, it's got a little more dimensionality and a little more interactivity.
Yeah.
And that's been going great. So that's www.theeasycoach.com.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I caught an earlier episode and the interaction was really neat. I mean, when I think of Twitch, I don't think of it as a platform to get career coaching. And I think I see that there's opportunity there. So I applaud you for taking those steps. Okay, so talk to me, like you've had a lot of experience overseeing teams. You've been in leadership roles. When we first met, it was in the context of leadership development and training of trainers. Big, broad question that we actually asked at the beginning of day one of the Leadership Clinic. What does effective leadership mean to you?
It's a great question because leadership means so many different things and has so many different aspects.
Yeah.
I think of effective leadership as a combination of determining what change may need to be made to people or a business, figuring out how to go about that change, and then inspiring people to undertake it and giving them the tools. So that's a lot of pieces, but I think of leadership as both direction and inspiration.
So now kind of applying that, think about, developing a new platform inside of an organization, piloting something. What are some of the ways that you get through that challenging phase of trying to figure out, like, is this even, did we do the right thing? Like, what are the resources you draw on to move from, because everybody goes through that phase in some capacity when you're piloting something new, right?
You use the word piloting in there, and I'm a big fan of experimentation. I guess my personal style and wiring has a lot of iteration in it. I'm not sort of go off in a vacuum, come up with an idea, and then come roll it out. I love to bounce things off of people and work to refine them. So, for example, taking the Easy Coach idea, I was working on that when I met you in the Leadership Clinic, but I didn't have a name for it. I didn't even know. I was just exploring, how do I scale coaching?
Yeah.
How do I scale what I'm already doing? And that took a lot of iteration, talking to different people at that Leadership Clinic and other forums, refining my ideas, thinking about them, testing a little bit. And so I go through it with a lot of testing and a lot of input. Now, that's my personal style. And it's interesting because I'm seen as pretty decisive and quick moving. But for some big change like that, I'm actually pretty slow. I probably worked on where I was going for 2 to 3 years before getting really clear on it. Of course, it's a huge change for me. I've always been an internal executive focused on driving business direction. And so moving from that to figure out how am I going to access a large audience to share my expertise, pretty big pivot from what I knew.
Put on your Easy Coach hat for a moment. You have, in that capacity, and also I know informally in your other leadership roles, I'm sure you have gotten a lot of questions from people, a lot of different topics. So I see you posting about the topics. So I'm curious, what are the things that people tend to have angst about or tend to ask you about a lot? The questions and that are just in particular interesting, or they occur a lot?
I would say a lot of them are frustrations with their career progress. You get a lot of questions about how to get a job, why I'm not getting a job, why I'm not being recognized in my job, why I'm not moving up in my job. And I think that's driven from, those are the most painful things.
Yeah.
If you don't have a job and you need one, there's a lot of pain around income and self-worth.
Right.
If you don't feel recognized at work, or that you're moving up the way you should, there's a lot of pain around that progress. And I think that pain causes people, that comes out as frustration and causes them to really ask questions where they may have a lot of things they're curious about, but this sort of more positive self-actualization of maybe what should I be doing, or what is the right role for me, or what are the right challenges for me, those aren't as painful. And so for people to take the effort to actually ask someone is less common than sort of the things that are frustrating them. So I'd say those are the, like, pain removal, it turns out, frustration removal.
Yeah.
Are the questions.
So switching gears a little bit, Twitch Prime, are you a gamer? Do you think of yourself as a gamer?
No, I was a gamer. I played a ton of video games as a kid.
Favorites?
No. Oh, geez. I played the most of something called The Bard's Tale, probably, which was like ancient. I grew up playing D&D. So anything that then looked like that was super appealing to me. In college, I did play a knockoff game of Star Trek called Net Trek that was, Klingons versus, the Federation. And I played a lot of that. It was actually in some ways the first organized eSport. We played matches with other colleges. There was no prizes or money or league. And so I had my brief competitive gaming phase. Yeah. Nothing anyone would recognize now as competitive gaming. Yeah. But, and then I got into a career. And for me, I discovered that human puzzles were more interesting than anything else. So even though I'm trained as an engineer, technology puzzles feel to me like once you solve them, they kind of stay solved. But human puzzles never stay solved. You may be working with someone and they get over something and they're better at a job and they're happy. And then they come back and see you 3 months later and something has changed in their lives or their situation, and they have a whole new set of problems. And so I found that endlessly interesting.
So, okay, you brought up esports, and I'm glad you did. What's the trajectory of esports and gaming? Where do you see it going? Like, where is it right now? Obviously, it's this like massive cultural phenomenon. I get the sense that it's growing, but it's still like, I feel like it hasn't quite broken through in the way that I don't know. Like, it feels like it's on the cusp maybe, but I don't know. Like, where do you see it going?
If you just look demographically, the future of esports is still in front of it. Gaming is now the second largest form of entertainment on earth, much bigger than books, movies, and music. It's behind only cable television, both for money and hours.
Wow.
And if you look at the growth rate, it's growing faster than cable television, and satellite on a global basis. And so the day when gaming will reign supreme economically is very predictable. You can just look at a graph and tell. And then for esports, they tend to be very generational. Younger people today have grown up with YouTube and they've grown up with Twitch, and it's natural to watch things there. For better or for worse, my two stepsons walk around the house with their phone in their hand, and like you are right now with one AirPod in. And they're kind of listening to the family, but they're also watching TV all the time. I think that generational change is going to sweep up into the earning power. Those individuals haven't yet reached full buying power in the economy. People also don't realize how big esports really are. Globally, you can sell out an entire sports arena to watch a championship esport. You can assemble an online audience for something like Counter-Strike of 1 million plus. These are pretty compelling events. Have they become the NFL yet? No. But if you look at the trajectory, I think it's coming, and it really is just the younger generation growing to be the core generation.
So, okay, translate this like there's a kid walking around, he's got one AirPod and he's got his phone. Okay, put that into the workplace. and you've got generations clashing in the workplace. And so I think there's one response to that of just like, these kids, right? These kids. Okay, well, these kids are your future workforce, and they're going to become the dominant future earning power at some point. So what has it looked like for you to navigate these generational differences in a place like Twitch, where I know that I think the workforce is a little bit on the younger side, and obviously the audience then is on the younger side. How do you navigate those generational differences at work?
Well, you have to be careful. There are generational differences, but there are also individuals. We can talk about generational trends, but then each individual responds to those somewhat differently.
Yes, exactly. That's an important point.
The biggest thing you see in the highly educated Silicon Valley employee, that's my experience, is working with the tech workers. Mm-hmm. And they're a very narrow slice of America. Because they generally have a 4-year college education, generally in a very highly compensated field.
Yeah.
And then they're immediately hotly sought after for a job.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what you hear about, like, how am I going to pay off my student debt?
Right.
They have student debt, but they're not facing it in quite the same way because they jumped right into a high paying job.
Yeah.
What I would say, though, is they care a lot about meaning. In other words, topics that I never really heard before, like what is our company's position on political issue X or social issue Y. When I began my career, work and politics were separate.
Right.
Work and social really meant that your company had a United Way fundraiser once a year, and United Way was chosen because it was super generic and like, or something like the Red Cross that would be very hard for people.
Habitat for Humanity, something like that.
Yeah, something very centrist and unobjectionable. Yeah. But now there's a lot of pressure and debate inside companies about the company taking strong positions. As an example, since it's public, and I'm not going to comment on the positions, just a few days ago, Amazon published a list of our positions on different issues. And we'd never done that before. I've been here 15 years. 15 years ago, I don't think it would have even been thought of to publish a list of positions. And times have simply evolved to where it's expected that a company will be clear about its political or social positions. Going back to leading individuals, there is then a managing of that social energy versus doing work or in conjunction with doing work, because it's a new set of concerns. And of course, not everyone agrees.
Yeah.
Where maybe in the past, I once saw an IBM manual that said, basically opinions are best kept at home. It was like super blunt,
and that's unthinkable today.
Unthinkable. And so you have to figure out, how do you harmonize a workforce enough they can work when there may be really strong disagreements about social issues?
Okay. So one thing I know about you is that you have a passion for the outdoors.
Yes.
What does that do for you? Talk about that side of yourself, because I think it's an interesting other side of the coin to hear you rattle off your tech accomplishments and the things you're involved with versus I know that you're passionate about being outside. So tell me about that.
Yeah, and that's really why I don't game as much as people would think I would in this role, is I discovered a love of the outdoors. And I am super active outdoors. I ski all winter. I'm on the board of the Washington Trails Association, which is our local hiker advocacy and trail preservation group. And I love to hike. I love to backpack. And for me, those experiences are restorative. In other words, as connected as the world is, my phone is never out of my reach. Right. I sleep with it on my bedstand. Obviously, from a technology viewpoint, I'm connected all the time. So going out in the woods where there's no cell signal is like my respite. There's also pretty good research on what sort of greenery and the outdoors does for your brain. Yeah. And I would say kind of for your soul, for your inner peace, that being outside in a city or in suburbia just doesn't do. You have to get away. my belief. I just find those to be my brakes, and they bring me back both motivated to work and clear-headed.
Do you have I'm thinking of the movie Inception, where people like they get hooked up to this machine. It's allowing them to like dream the same dream. I think at some point VR is going to get to the point where if you want to, you can live your entire biological life in a simulator and just sort of be sustained. And that to me feels like a significant part of our humanity would be lost. You're obviously working for a tech company who, I mean, let's be blunt, would benefit and probably would pioneer some of that technology too. Like, how do you balance those competing? Like, yes, the outdoors, I heard you say it's good for the soul. Okay, but also technology is going to keep going to the point where people could simulate the outdoors anytime they want to. How do you balance that personally?
So the concept you're talking about is often called the Metaverse. And it's there are three major novels. We'll see if I can rattle them off. Like, each a different generation. The first novel was William Gibson and was called The Neuromancer, and kind of first set up the idea of the metaverse. And then later came Neil Stephenson and a novel called Snow Crash. And then most recently, the novel turned movie, and unfortunately I won't remember the author's name on this one, called Ready Player One. Every 15 years, basically a new and updated take on what this is going to look like. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is I would say all three of them are dystopian. Mm-hmm. And so those authors, none of them really imagines this as a great place because they are all escapism. Video games are also escapism. They take you into a magical world where you can fly or you're this great warrior or whatever it is, you're this IndyCar driver. I think with VR, it could go much more into that mental escapism. Mm-hmm. Is that completely bad? Like, there's amazing positive tools that can come from this. Sure. If I switch to the other side of that, that's where the novels and pop culture takes it. But if you think about some of the stuff, for example, Microsoft has tried to do with HoloLens, where a plumber can guide you through fixing your plumbing without coming to your house. A doctor can do surgery without being there. You know, we can all experience great places we can't afford to travel. There's all these positives. I can certainly tell the same story of this world. And I think the question is, how does that world evolve? It's certainly coming.
So this is a question of values, which is actually what so this is really important. So I hear buzz right now from a lot of different places. We're Go Innovation. We're in conversation with a couple different tech companies who are recognizing we have charged ahead with developing like software and platforms. And most of us have not actually stopped and thought about what are the values that are going to be driving how people implement this software. And it's caused a bunch, whether it's incidents of there's just a lot of negative fallout on both individual and also corporate levels. I think people are realizing, wow, we need to take seriously what are the values. And what I hear you saying is the world could be a good one with net benefit. It could be an escapist dystopian net negative. And in my mind, what makes the difference are the values that any of us bring into how we might use technology. So for you, as you think about the sources, what are the sources of your own values and how do you try to work that, if you do, into the work that you do, through a tech company?
It's a great question. Now I'm going to reach way back in my memory and see if I can pull up the right book. I think the author is Bruce Wilkinson. Is he the one who wrote The Vine?
Yes.
Anyway, he had another book that was after The Vine, and he made a point that I've never lost, which is if you believe in God and you believe in eternity, then the only permanent things in this world are the people around you. Everything else will go away. And therefore, people are the only thing to invest in because they're actually the only eternal construct around you. Now, you don't have to be religious or Christian to also have the idea that humans are the most valuable, more valuable than money or material constructs. Sure. But I think my values in this area come from that lens of what is worth doing. I've been fortunate. I have a good job. And so I have lots of material things. Material things are nice to have, but they're not going to make you happy. Right. And there's very good research that shows, if you have a choice between buy a new TV and pay to have an experience, a night out with your wife or, sundown cruise or something, the experience is going to bring you more joy over time.
Yes.
So I think my values come from trying to help people and invest in their happiness. Now, the way I do that, my gift and talent and experience are in helping people succeed in their careers. Mm-hmm. But we spend so much of our time working that I feel like if I can help someone have a better career and maybe attain the material possessions they need to live, it can have this huge downstream effect on their lives. From a value viewpoint, though, it then comes, how do you help people not exploit them? So that's led to whole new areas for me. I'm learning a lot, maybe even since you and I met in person, about diversity, equity, and inclusion that I didn't really understand previously. And those are in line with that value of trying to help everyone have opportunity to be their best selves is a common sort of almost trite phrase now. But I feel like if I can help people one step on that journey of being the best person and the happiest person they can, I'm doing something good and lasting.
Yeah, man, I resonate with that. Okay, so you've mentioned a bunch of books. Anything you're reading right now that you would want to talk about or recommend?
Well, so I have this book, I guess, really opened my eyes. It was recommended to me in turn, called Leadership and Self-Deception from the Arbinger Institute. And it's a book, I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I'm not.
It's a book about how we can tend to treat other people either as people or as obstacles. When we interact with people, we either see them as humans with feelings and needs like we have, or we see them as entities that can either oppose or enable what we want. And the key for me was understanding that people know intuitively which one you're doing. Mm-hmm. You use the same words, but if you're speaking with manipulative intent, people pull that out from your body language or your tone very quickly. Sure. And the example I give of this that's really easy to figure out is if you think about someone you unfortunately don't like, and for whatever reason, but you don't like them, and they come to you with a really pretty simple request, like, could I borrow a pencil? It absolutely goes through your mind, no. You may give them the pencil but you have this very quick, like, I'm going to thwart this person. On the other hand, if you have someone you really like and care about and a friend, and they come to you with a horrible, inconvenient request where it's pouring down rain on a cold, Sunday morning, and they're like, hey, I need to move apartments. Could you come carry stuff all day? You're very inclined to say yes. So what makes you so inclined to say yes to this super painful request and so inclined to spitefully tell the person you can't borrow a pencil? And it's all about that interaction you've had. And so this book really opened my eyes a little bit on how much of that we create through our own side of the interaction.
As we're winding down the conversation, bullet points, you give a ton of career advice. Uh-huh. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, well, okay, give me the top 3 mistakes that I can avoid, or stuff that you recommend, or 3 or 5, whatever. Give me the machine gun bullet points of what you've seen that you want to help people avoid or steer towards.
Thank you. I've come up with something I call the magic loop for growing in your career. And the magic loop has 5 steps. And those 5 steps begin with do your job well. You can't do anything more until you're performing your base job that you have pretty well.
Yeah.
People forget this. They want to jump by it. But you said quickly, so do your job well. Yep. Then you go to your boss and you ask your boss, hey, how can I help you? I'm doing my job well, at least I think I am. How can I help you? And that's step 2. Step 3 is when they tell you something, then do it. And this seems obvious, but you can't go to your boss and ask for something and be like, I don't really want to do that. Or And this happens more than you think, like, oh, I didn't think they'd ask me to take the garbage out. Put a smile on and carry the garbage. Step 4 is after you've done that thing well, you go back to your boss and you say, hey, I have these interests. I want to be more of an artist or more of a public speaker or do something more technically. What could I do that would help you but be in line with my career goals? So you've earned a little bit of credibility that you're helpful, but now you go back and kind of channel like, hey, I did take the garbage out and I'm always happy to take the garbage out again if we need to. Mm-hmm. But, could I also help on Project Moonshot? And then the last thing is do that well and repeat. And this magic loop, basically, if you just walk around this loop as fast as you can or run around it, your career will skyrocket. Now, each of those steps is easy to say and maybe hard to do.
Sure.
But my door is right here out, and I can tell you it's very rare that my employees come in and say, hey, I think I'm on top of my job right now. What else could I do to help? And when they do, I take notice. And it's really what building a career is about, which is broadening your skill set and doing more.
Yeah. So I see that from two sides. Like if you're listening or watching to this and you're like, okay, I would like to advance. That's like incredible advice. I also think if you're listening or watching and you are a leader, you're responsible for other people. A really good diagnostic question might be, do you make opportunities like that for the people you lead? Have you told them you can come to me in this way? Because a lot of people, even if they're really great and take initiative in other areas, that might feel like a sort of an impenetrable barrier.
Yeah, completely. Leaders need to be aware that no matter how nice they think they are, they're still the boss and people are concerned in talking to them.
Yeah, that's a great point. So just in closing, Ethan, like anything else that you care about, like a lot, would want to say, would want people to part with as a highlight?
Absolutely. The thing I would bring up is you asked me before we got on about what did I get from our leadership clinic we shared. And I never had a chance to share that. And it's a 2-part. There was a part in that clinic where we needed to then teach a technique to someone else. And where you and the other facilitators challenged us to teach part of the material or reteach it. And 2 things there. Number 1, I didn't want to do that. And I found it very challenging. Like, I don't feel competent. So I had to overcome my fear because I'm like, I just learned this. I don't know how to teach it. So I had to overcome my fear and jump in. And I think that's a big piece, which is give it a try.
Yes.
Particularly in a safe environment. Like, so I failed. What was going to happen? A little embarrassment. But then the second thing is what I retaught was pretty successful. And actually you and one of the other facilitators were like, that's a pretty good way to teach that. I think we're going to steal that.
Oh, yeah.
And the funny thing there I'll observe is how quickly my feelings then changed, right? I had been hesitant and resistant, and now I'm like, oh yeah. And it's just funny how susceptible we are to a little bit of approval or disapproval.
Yes.
Because really, I had just met you and your fellow facilitators, and yet it was really important to me to have succeeded in front of that audience. And it's notable for leaders to just realize again how much humans bring their emotions to everything they do. You may want to think of them, particularly in technology. We like to think of people as like these idealized cogs.
Yeah.
You give them work, they do work. And you're just missing that whole emotional journey that they're taking every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I remember specifically, it was talking about the 3 cultures. There's an example that you gave in discussion. I don't remember if this is what you retaught, but there was a discussion about 3 cultures of leadership. You have dependent culture, which is sort of top-down hierarchical. You got independent culture where you've got people just leading by force of example, but it's not tied to formal institution. And then you've got interdependent, which is this like magical co-creation and collaboration. And you were basically saying, I detect a bias against dependent, but like with Amazon Web Services as an example, we've got these structures that are in place where if something goes down, like everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to do. There's no experimentation or collaboration. That provides the safety for an individual team inside this structure to then behave in an interdependent way. And I've used that example. Like, I have a friend at Amazon and he said this, and like that has become part of the furniture and what we did. So I really appreciated that insight from you at the time.
All right.
Man, thank you for sharing that. That's like very kind. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Ethan, for your time. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you. I wish you the best as you continue to develop Twitch Prime and move forward with Easy Coach. And I look forward to continuing to intersect with you.
All right. Well, Rory, it's been a real pleasure to be a guest. It's good to see you face to face again. And I look forward to my next chance to connect with you in person.
That was honestly so kind of Ethan to share what he shared about our leadership clinic. As of the time of this recording, all of our in-person leader development events are indefinitely postponed. We're looking forward to starting those up in the future. In the meantime, we've been doing a lot online. And there's one thing in particular you might be interested in. If you're listening or watching and you lead remote teams and meetings, which a lot of people are doing right now for the first time, or maybe you've been doing this for a while. If that's you, and if you'd be interested in some simple tools that you can apply immediately to be more effective at that, I invite you to go to remote.go-innovation.com to check out a webinar that we recently held. It's totally free. It's 45 minutes long. You'll receive some tools for organizing any meeting to make it more relevant and succinct. You'll learn how to avoid typical mistakes that leaders make during remote meetings. There's a couple tools to encourage more meaningful dialogue, even when your team's not in the same place. There's a clear framework to track your effectiveness as a leader or manager over time, and more. You just got to sign up. And then you'll get our excellent newsletter. Well, you'll be the first person to find out about things like new Work Like a Human episodes. So as we close, I want to invite you to think again about your values. Do you agree with Ethan that the most valuable investment you can make is people? What does it look like for you to deepen your investment or to start seriously investing into someone around you, just one person? In my experience as a coach and facilitator, people underestimate two things. Number one, they underestimate how much of an impact verbal affirmation and affirming feedback can have on someone. And so we just forget to encourage each other. Number two, people underestimate how much they have to give. You may not feel that this is true, but you can make a big difference in someone else's life by doing or saying something that may seem small to you. That's all for this conversation. Thank you for joining me. See you next time.